전 여러분의 한국어 친구들 사랑합니다. Okay, so today's video was highly requested. We're going to be talking about how I learned Korean vocabulary. And in this video, we're going to talk specifically about how I learned Korean vocabulary through textbooks. So textbooks are my favorite place to learn vocabulary because the textbooks build on themselves, right? So the vocabulary words that you see in chapter 1 are the words you'll probably see used in chapter 10, right? And you'll also see these words like in all the practices. You'll see them in the reading sections, the listening sections, the dialogues, like literally they're everywhere. So you're gonna see the same words over and over and over and over again to the point where like you want to learn the words because it's just more convenient for you to learn the words than to keep looking it up. But even if you're not the type of person to learn through textbooks, this method is still going to be applicable to you. So if you're using like PDF courses like Talk to Me in Korean or How to Study Korean or any other type of course that offers a like vocabulary list that builds on itself, then this method will work for you. So now that I've talked about that, I just want to show you guys which textbooks I'm currently using to learn vocabulary. So I am an intermediate learner, so these textbooks are both intermediate level. The first one is this beautiful textbook. Ta-da! So this is the Ewha University intermediate level textbook. So okay, well technically this is the study guide. I'm showing you the study guide because it is where they actually have the vocabulary list. So in the textbooks, they kind of scatter all the vocabulary throughout the book. And chapter 1, like in the margins, you'll always see new word and it'll tell you what it is, like what the new word is, but it won't actually define it for you. It won't even define it for you in Korean. So the study guide is a place to go if you want to see the vocabulary like on one page and if you want to have like a translation. So the study guide's available in English, Japanese, and Chinese if I remember correctly. So definitely get the study guide if you are studying with the Ewha books. So the Ewha books are available pretty much everywhere that offers Korean books. So Amazon, Two Choice, but I'll link it for you down below. And then the other textbooks that I'm using to study vocabulary is this beautiful textbook. So this one is the textbook that my Korean host university wrote for its language classes. So this is the intermediate level textbooks. It's extremely similar to the Ewha one in that there's not actually a vocabulary list with defined definitions or the vocabulary list on one page. Like it's scattered throughout the whole chapter, like in the margins, being like, this is a new word, and again, it won't define it for you. I don't understand why. Just define it for me in Korean, bro, but it doesn't. So this textbook actually isn't available to you guys because you have to you have to go to my university and buy it because they don't sell it online anywhere. So yeah, sorry, I already tried to look for it. But anyway, now we're gonna go get into that step-by-step guide of how I learn vocabulary through textbooks. So go! So there are 3 things that you're gonna need to follow this method. The first one is your textbook. That's a given. Your textbook or whatever coursework you're trying to go through, make sure you have that. The second is an ugly notebook. So this is my ugly notebook. It's not actually ugly, as you can tell, it's quite nice actually. The reason I call it my ugly notebook is because the inside will never make it to my study room. And I'll explain that a little bit more later. But just know you're gonna need to have a notebook that you're okay with it being ugly inside and not formatting things inside. And again, we'll get to that later. And then the third thing you're gonna need is Memrise. So Memrise is an app as well as a website that allows you to learn things, basically. So the polyglot community really enjoys using it to learn vocabulary more quickly because it utilizes spaced repetition to help you learn words more quickly, basically. If you don't know what spaced repetition is, I'll link a video for you down below that beautifully explains what it is and why it's beneficial to learning. But just for those of you that don't know, we'll give you a little brief explanation. So basically, it's been scientifically proven, like this study method, has been scientifically proven to help you learn things faster by utilizing when you're about to forget that like content. So if I'm about to forget this word, like scientifically it'll have like a timeline like, oh, she's probably about to forget this word. It'll be like, hey, review this word. And then so that way when you review it, it'll take you longer to forget it the next time. I know you're like, what? But just watch that video. watch the video and it'll make perfect sense. Now that you know what you're gonna need, let's get into step number. That was about to be like number. This is, what even is this? Number one, step number one. All right, so the first thing you're gonna wanna do is open up Memrise. So for me, I found that it's most beneficial to actually study the vocabulary on Memrise before I even start chapter 1 or lesson 1. So I'll go through Memrise and be like, okay, and I'll learn all the vocabulary before I even open the textbook. So for the Yuhua books, I started learning all the vocabulary before I started the lesson, right? And then as I'm going through the lesson 1 material, right, I'm learning lesson 2 vocabulary. So the reason I do this is because by going through the vocabulary first, it really helps, it helps you start learning in a way. So that way when you're going through the material and you're going through like your workbook, like practice workbook and everything, you're already familiar with the words. And so when you forget a word, it's not because you didn't know it. It's because you just forgot. So now you know that you need to go back and review that word. I think it's also important for me to mention that Memrise is always a supplement. You're not gonna actually learn words through Memrise, like unless it's just nouns or something, because you'll notice that as you get further in your studies, connotation is very important, and that's kind of something that's hard to learn through Memrise or any like thing that doesn't give you context, because context is so important when learning vocabulary. But yeah, so just make yourself familiar with the vocabulary by going through the vocabulary lists on Memrise before moving into your textbook. I think it's also important to mention that almost every popular course has a Memrise course as well. So that's basically like a vocabulary list that users have made. So Talk to Me in Korean, almost all of their grammar lessons have vocabulary lists on there. Both these textbooks have vocabulary lists on there. Pretty much everything has a vocabulary list on there already, so you don't have to even make it. But if you can't find it or you don't trust whatever list you found, you can make your own. So yeah, so step number 1 is to go through those vocabulary words before you actually start the lesson, because it'll make you more motivated to learn the words and it'll point out which words you don't actually remember very well. And then that way when you see them in context, you're just gonna learn them better. Right, so step number 2. Okay, I'm sorry. But step number 2 is to start taking notice of which words you're having issues remembering. So this is when you're gonna start needing that ugly notebook that we talked about. Okay, so open up your ugly notebook, right? And you're gonna start writing down the words that you don't remember or the words that you have questions about. So for example, sometimes there are words that I honestly just can't remember. So in my ugly notebook, I will write down the word, I'll write down the definition, and then I'll write it over and over and over again, especially if I keep misspelling the word. So it just helps me to have a place to do that. Another thing you're gonna wanna do is if you have a question about a specific word, and this is more applicable to people who are further in their studies. I don't think this is gonna be as helpful for beginners because you won't have these types of questions. But if you are intermediate or advanced, you're going to wanna like pay attention to which words you've learned that have similar words, I guess. So for example, the word 지원하다 and 신청하다 both mean to apply. So when I was learning these words, I had a lot of questions. I was like, okay, so 신청하다, I learned it in the context of applying for classes or registering for classes. 지원하다, I learned as in to apply for a job. These are the two contexts that I learned these words in. So even though these contexts are different, can I use these words in these other, like in these different situations? Are they interchangeable? Because as you get further in your studies, you will notice that there are different ways to say the exact same thing. And when you put them in a dictionary, they'll be defined as having the exact same word because it won't teach you the connotation, right? So you're gonna wanna write those words down and you're gonna wanna put like a question mark. So for me, I write a big Q and I'll say, what is the difference between this word and this word? Can they be used in the same situations, for example? Or which word is more natural in this situation? So for me, when I was learning 신청하다 and 지원하다, I remember I wrote down, can both of these words be used to mean to apply for a loan? Can both of these words be used to mean I applied for a scholarship? So again, that's more applicable to people that are further in their studies, but just keep that in mind as you're advancing. Step number 3. All right, for step number 3, you're actually going to need to open up your computer or your iPad, tablet, whatever. So you're gonna have to open up the Naver dictionary. I should have mentioned that in materials, sorry. But you're gonna open up the dictionary, you're gonna type in the word, or the first word you wanna look up, and you're gonna see, okay, what are the example sentences that it gives me for this word? So you're gonna scroll down, specifically go to where it has VLive subtitles. And you wanna use VLive subtitles over the examples that the dictionary gives you, because the dictionary examples are like super fancy and sometimes they're not as natural. So you go down to the VLive subtitles, because these are usually people that are around our age. Usually it's like a ton of idols or it's like comedians or something. So they're like within a good age group. So basically the sentences they're using are extremely natural. So you can see, okay, so this word is used in this sentence. And you can see, okay, so if I learned a really fancy noun, for example, the other day I learned the word 공감. And if I remember correctly, it means sympathy. I'm pretty sure it means sympathy, but now that like you're staring at me, I'm getting a little nervous. I can see that word, okay, if I read it, I know what it means, but I don't actually know how to use that word. Like, what verb should I use to say, oh, he gained a lot of sympathy? What word should I use to say he has a lot of sympathy for other people? Like, I just don't know what verb should be used with it. So when I look at those example sentences or those VLive subtitles, I can see, okay, so this word is used with this verb, and this verb, and this verb. And so in my ugly notebook, I want to write down a few of those examples or a few of those VLive subtitles so that I can reference them later. It's like, okay, so it's used in this way, it's used in that way. It'll just help me start learning the word through context when I'm having issues learning it on its own. Another thing I want to talk about is why I'm calling it an ugly notebook, because I realized that I didn't tell you guys why it's an ugly notebook. So the reason that I'm calling this an ugly notebook is because there's very limited formatting in it. There's no color coding. It's my place to be messy. So I've learned that having a studygram, I want so many of my notes to be beautiful so I can take a beautiful picture of them and be like, hey guys, I studied Korean today. But I've noticed that when I'm doing that, my brain is not focused on learning Korean. My brain is focused on making sure that I use the right pen to write Korean in, the right pen color to write the definition, and the right pen color to write down that example sentence, because I'm color coding, because color coding is pretty, right? But I found that color coding honestly just slows me down and keeps me from learning the material, because I get all upset when I use the wrong color for the wrong word. So here I make myself only use one pen color when I'm like going through a study session. So very limited formatting. You will see here that I do have like the words highlighted a little bit, and that's just like after my study session, I'll go back and like highlight just so I can find words faster. Like, okay, this section was all about this word. This section was all about this word. This section was all about this word. But again, it's extremely messy, very limited formatting. I will draw arrows across the page. I will strike things out like, no, not this, that was wrong. It's just a place where I can really focus on learning the material. So that's why I call it my ugly notebook, because it'll never make it to Instagram, probably. So step number 3 is to look up the words on Naver and scroll down and see what the subtitles are and write down those VLive subtitles as example sentences, because they're more natural and they'll show you how a word should be used in like the contexts that it can be used in. Step number 4. So step number 4 is more for people who are further in their studies, but it is good to keep this stuff in mind as a beginner. So as you're like looking at those VLive subs and you're looking at those words, you're gonna want to take note of the words that have the same definition. So for example, earlier I was talking about 신원하다, 신청하다 and 지원하다. So again, both of them mean to submit or to apply, right? So if I'm learning the word 신청하다 and I look it up in the dictionary and I see, oh, there's another way to say to apply, I'm gonna go ahead and write down 신청하다, because I want to know which words have similar meanings. Another good example would be 체험 and 경험. So both of them mean experience. When you look them up in the dictionary, both of them will say experience, but they're used very differently. So one of them is used for like a one-time experience, like a field trip or a free trial of something. And then there's another one that means to gain, like it's used more in the context of gaining experience. So in my experience with dogs, I have learned that they're so cute or something. It's not like, it's something that has to be gained over time, and one of them is something that's like in this moment in time, just this one time. So when you use them, it's completely different connotations. So for example, when you learn one of those words, you're probably going to find lots of articles or like blog posts about the two of them and how they're different. And so if you didn't know there were two of them, you're going to want to go ahead and just write down that other word. And so you can distinguish, okay, this is different and this is different. Because I found that textbooks usually don't tell you when there's another word that's extremely similar, but also vastly, like extremely different at the same time. So if you encounter those things, you want to write them down in your ugly notebook. Step number 5. We're almost done, guys. We're almost done. So step number 5 is reviewing. So once you've gone through all these steps, you know, you're going to want to study your words every now and then, you know. Study as often as you need to, because I know you're wondering, okay, Natalia, how often should I be reviewing? Honestly, that's going to depend on you and how often you study. So if you're only studying once a week, you're going to have to study a lot longer the next time you sit down. But if you're studying Korean every single day, you're probably not going to have to review for as long. You can probably review for like 10 minutes. 10 minutes or less, because you've technically been reviewing every time you study. For me, once I've like gone through the chapter, once I have looked at these words, right, a few times, I'm like, okay, I can use these words on my own now. I'll wait like a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and then I'll go back and I'll take my vocabulary list, I'll cover up the Korean portion, and I'll just look at the English portion, and I will try to list off the words. So if I'm looking at it and it says experience, I'll be like, 체험. If it says to apply, I'll be like, okay, 지원하다 or 신청하다, basically. So I want to test myself later on. And I'm not saying like, oh, 2 days later. No. I'm saying like way later. Because I've found that with Memrise, because Memrise gives you options, and if you've ever used Memrise, you'll know what I'm talking about. But when it presents you with a word, it'll give you like 6 options to choose from. And it's very easy to start recognizing things, but that one's that one, that one's that one. But when you only have one word, it's a lot harder to remember it. So I'll do that. I'll just basically give myself a pop quiz before I start studying again, because I want to make sure that I'm really learning those words. And then the words that I'm not learning, I'll go ahead and highlight, and I'll say, okay, we got to spend more time on this one. Guess we got to go look at all the VLive subs again. We're going to have to go back and review the differences of this word with other words. But yeah, so that's the last step, just making sure that you're reviewing, giving yourself pop quizzes every now and then when you can, just to, again, make sure that you are, like, learning the words. Okay, so hopefully you found this video helpful. I know I just threw so much information at you. Hopefully this video didn't get like too long and that you actually were able to follow what I was saying. I know I was very like methodical, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But yeah. So again, I don't do this for I don't do this every time I sit down. Usually I'll have a vocabulary specific study session. So again, I'll note the words, right? And then later I'll go back and look in Naver and everything, because usually it'll take me like 3 hours to go through just like 20 words, going like to Naver and looking at the definitions and writing down all the subtitles and things like that. It's very like time intensive, but at the same time, like I remember the words a lot faster later. Like the chance that I'm gonna forget a word is like so slim when I do this. But again, it takes a long time. So yeah, just be prepared for that. If it takes you a long time, that's normal, or at least for me, that's also normal. But yeah, so again, hopefully this was helpful for you, and I'll see you guys next time. So, 다음에 봐요, guys. Bye.